live stream. Between our two laptops and cell phones, we have 3 different times. So if we take the average, it's 9 o'clock. So welcome to everyone. I see we have 2 members online. Have I got more than 2 members? Just trying to see who's there. So we do have a quorum. Member Walters is just running a little bit late. He phoned me, he will be here shortly. I have not had any apologies. I just want to find out if there are apologies from anyone else. Not, okay. Okay, so this is a hybrid meeting. We have 2 members online. Obviously, we all know about, remaining muted and all of that. So thank you very much. What we are doing today is we are dealing with the briefing by the Western Cape Provincial Parliament on the Western Cape Amendment Bill, which is a determination of a number of members. We had the meeting in February where this presentation was requested. I just want to find out before we commence, are there any comments from the speaker before we start with any of this?
No. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Chair. No comments. I think if it's in order to get into the presentation, and then we'll answer questions as we go along.
Just one thing, I think, for the record, I know we do this every meeting. Can we all just indulge ourselves by introducing ourselves so we do have that on record? I will start. We'll go through to the public reps and then the officials. So I'm Benedicta van Minden, the chair of the Standing Committee. Thanks.
Good morning, Chair. Wendy Kaiser-Philander, member of this committee.
Good morning, Chair, and everybody attending. I'm Leon van Wyk, member of this committee.
Morning, Chairperson Khalid Sayed, member of the committee.
Good morning, Chair. Donita Stevens, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, Brett Heron, member of the committee.
And then if the officials of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament could please introduce themselves.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning, Chairperson, Speaker, and honourable members. Romeo Adams, Secretary to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament.
Good morning, Chair, members. Vernon Titus, Director Institutional Enablement.
Good morning, Chair. Nicole Peterson, CFO.
Good morning, Chair, members. Dawood Jawardin, Manager Finance.
Good morning, Chair and members. Lubabalo Stemele, Director Parliamentary Support Services.
Good morning, Chair. Morning, members. Mario Sassman, Manager Committee Support. Thank you.
Good morning. Andre Leroux, Senior Legal Advisor.
Is there anybody online who needs to introduce themselves?
Morning, Chairperson. Maybe I can introduce myself. Johan Vermeulen, Committee Section.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. Yanni A, Speaker's Office.
Okay, great. All right, as the speaker has suggested, if we can then go into the presentation. After the presentation, we can then ask questions and then we can see where we are with that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, so the correspondence dated the 21st of February to the administration and the Speaker request information sharing and documentation on the implementation of possible amendments as it relates to the seats, financial implications, and then also the number of seats and the balance of the seat allocation. With us today is the Senior Legal Advisor. He will do the main presentation that deals with the law, the implications thereof, and how we got to where we are at the moment in terms of the 7th administration, some of the work that was done in the 6th administration. We also have the Chief Financial Officer that will attend to any questions related to costing implications. Mr. Titus, the Director Institutional Enablement, if there are any questions related to infrastructure and accommodation. But Chairperson, if you would just allow me to just do a few words of introduction. Chairperson, the legislation makes provision for the IEC to determine the number of seats per provincial legislature prior to a provincial and national elections that we have every 5 years. The Western Cape Provincial Parliament is, however, a bit different because we are the only province who has a constitutional court approved constitution, which provides for the number of seats of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, which means that the determination of seats is a process that happens within the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, and that is the process that we are providing some input to here today. Chairperson, I'm just looking to share one or two documents the Electoral Commission had for the other provinces. They had in the previous parliamentary term, they had gone through a process where they had looked at the increase of the number of seats of all of the other legislatures. The document that I'm sharing, I'm going to see if I can just make it a bit bigger. Okay, it basically means that for the provinces of Gauteng, they were increased from 73 to 80 seats, Limpopo from 49 to 64, Mpumalanga from 30 seats to 51, Northwest from 33 to 38, Free State from 30, and they had remained on 30 because of the formula. KwaZulu-Natal had reached its maximum of 80, and therefore they remained on 80. The Northern Cape 30 seats, and they remained on 30 because that is the minimum. The Eastern Cape had moved from 63 seats to 72 seats. And you will see the note there that indicates the Western Cape Provincial Parliament is responsible for its own. The IEC had also gone through a public participation process. They had also, other than comments from the general public, they had also received some input from National Treasury related to the at this time intended increase in the number of seats. The Western Cape Provincial Parliament, through the Office of the Secretary, had attempted on various occasions to get from the IEC the input from National Treasury. We've not yet been successful. We had asked the provincial manager, Mr. Hendrikse, whether he could assist us, and he's also made all reasonable attempts to get that input for us from National Treasury, because we think some of those inputs, if the committee and if the WCPP considers it, it may add some value to the deliberations and consideration. As soon as we do receive such input, Chairperson, we'll then, through the Speaker, obviously make it available to the committee, should it arrive in time before the committee makes a decision. Chairperson, this had then led to, there was no change in the determination from the public participation processes, and the IEC had then determined these numbers for the other provincial legislatures. I think the highest increase is 21 seats in Mpumalanga. The provinces that were on 30, that had remained on 30, as I'd indicated, is because that was the minimum number as the law provides for. Chairperson, I thought maybe just that introduction was happening elsewhere in the country. I'll now hand over to Advocate Leroux to take us through the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. I just want to see whether I can project my presentation. Chairperson, for purposes of my presentation, I focused on the specific requests that the committee made for this briefing. I address a number of questions on that request, or I attempt to in any event, but there are also a number of other questions which other colleagues will speak to. Chairperson, the first question, I'm actually starting with one of the questions that's a bit one of the later questions in the request we received from the committee. I thought that would be a good point to start. The question was, what is the proposed number of seats for the amendment? I'm not going to linger here long on this point. The first point there is that this is it's ultimately a policy determination to be made by the committee, which of course doesn't mean that the administration cannot advise on that question. But it is a policy question. I thought, Chairperson, I just quickly want to run through the previous policy decisions that other committees of this legislature has made, because I thought that could give this committee just a bit of a quick run through of what the position is at this point in time and what prior decisions has been made, even though some of the members may be familiar with some of this. In November of 2022, there was an ad hoc committee called the Ad hoc Committee WCPP Seats that tabled a report in the House. I've made that report available to the committee so that the committee can get a full sense of the research the ad hoc committee looked at, etc. It was the function of that committee to determine whether the existing number of seats of the legislature is appropriate and whether the existing number of seats is sufficient to represent the people of the Western Cape optimally. I think that's more or less a quote from the report. The committee concluded that the number of seats is no longer adequate or adequate to optimally represent the people of the Western Cape. So I think that is an important policy decision or recommendation that committee made to the House. That committee also recommended that the issue of amending the provincial constitution to change the number of seats be referred to the Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Affairs. It recommended that the provincial constitution be amended to provide for periodic review of the number of seats. And then the committee also recommended that the 1 in 100,000 formula, which is one member for every 100,000 residents of a province, which is the formula being used in the Electoral Act, that formula be considered as a guideline. In September 2022, the same committee was briefed on certain policy options for amending the provincial constitution. That document has also been made available to this committee. To very briefly summarize that document, there were 3 proposals in it for amending the provincial constitution. The one was to incorporate a formulaic approach, which, long story short, is an approach where the constitution says that there will be one member for 100,000 or 80,000 residents, as the case may be. There was also a recommendation simply that the number of seats in Section 13 of the Provincial Constitution be substituted with another number. And there was also a recommendation that Section 13 of the Provincial Constitution be repealed. And I will get back to some of those a bit later. At that point, the parliamentary administration, which would be legal support in this case, raised a concern with the constitutionality of the formulaic approach. I don't think the concern was so much that it is necessarily unconstitutional, but I think the concern was that there are legitimate legal questions as to how to implement the formulaic approach and how the Constitutional Court, when it certifies the bill, would approach that. And I think the point was that on the substitution recommendation and the repeal recommendation that the Constitutional Court already found on those approaches, and it is uncontroversial, and to put it this way, there's very little risk to approaching the Constitutional Court on those approaches. At the time, the committee appeared to favor the formulaic approach. I don't think that was as much a resolution of the committee, but the committees in deliberation expressed a preference for the formulaic approach. Therefore, the point of departure for the Constitution of the Western Cape First Amendment Bill, as it was called then, was the formulaic approach, which provided that the number of seats will be determined by allocating 1 seat for every 100,000 of the population. I've also made that bill available to the committee, and that is the version of the bill that was circulated for purposes of the public hearings in the 6th term. So that was the bill that was put before the public. Maybe to just pause on that, I want to make the point that even though that was the draft bill, the public involvement process and the presentations made to the public very much took the principle of whether the number of seats should be increased to the public rather than what that particular number should be. So that presentation would have indicated, listen here, if there could be 48 members or 50 members or 60 members, that decision hasn't been made yet. But the question to the public fundamentally was, what is the public's view? Should the number of members be increased or not? In November of 2023, after the public involvement process, the Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Affairs met and agreed to amend the bill. So that was the bill that went out for public hearings to provide for direct substitution of the number of seats with the number 48. So at that point, the committee made a decision not to proceed with the formulaic approach, and the committee decided on the substitution approach. And that also at that point in time, the Western Cape government also raised concerns with constitutionality of the formulaic approach. I can say that at the point that this bill was decided on, there was, the Western Cape government and provincial parliament felt comfortable that any constitutionality concerns have been addressed, and a number of recommendations made by the Western Cape government was incorporated into that version. It seemed at the time as though the number of 48 was mostly decided on with reliance on budgetary information and what the committee considered affordable. This is the version of the bill that was sent to the House, and that has been revived, and that is now before this committee. I think my first recommendation here would be that to go forward for this committee to decide what approach the committee wishes to follow to determine an appropriate number of seats. And I think in this case, the question is simply repeal or substitution. I want to make a few comments on the repeal approach. If it is the approach, if this is the decision of the committee that Section 13 of the Provincial Constitution be repealed, then the number of seats will be determined in the manner provided for in the Electoral Act. So it will effectively not be necessary for this committee or for this legislature to make a decision on what that number should be. The repeal will have the effect of alignment with the policy decision expressed in the Electoral Act regarding the number of seats of the provincial legislature. And it will also ensure consistency between the provincial legislatures. So a repeal will obviate the need for this legislature to develop and justify a policy other than the one expressed in the Electoral Act. It will basically be we accept to follow the norm, to put it that way, that is established in the Electoral Act. The substitution approach, if it is the approach that Section 13 of the Provincial Constitution should be amended with substitution of the number 42 with another number, the committee needs to consider what criteria it wishes to apply to determine what an appropriate number would be. As I said before, these are essentially policy decisions that may be informed by an objective and professional analysis of the work of members from an organizational perspective. The second question I will move on to was the question, how will the amendment affect the current balance of seat allocations? Even though the provincial constitution can provide for the number of seats of the legislature, the process or the mechanism for giving effect to that is provided for in the Electoral Act, which imposes various obligations and functions on the Electoral Commission. The Secretary already referred to some of that. Specifically, Schedules 1 and 1A of the Electoral Act, there are a number of processes regarding candidates and lists, and after the election, the IEC must make certain steps. It results in designation of the representatives, et cetera, et cetera. So it's that process that then gives effect to the number of seats in the legislature and how those seats are allocated, of course. So effect can only be given to a change in the number of seats after a provincial election. Hence, the current balance of seat allocations will only change after the next election. The Secretary reminded me yesterday that Maybe I should mention it is, of course, possible in terms of the Constitution, I think Section 108, after 3 years for a Premier to dissolve a legislature and then for elections to be held for a new legislature. But then technically that would terminate the 7th term of this legislature and bring in the 8th term of the legislature somewhat earlier. And of course, that will also have,
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Do you mind just speaking a bit further into the mic? It's just getting a little difficult to hear. Thanks.
Sure, that's fine. Then the third question was a request for a detailed timeline for the process of completing the bill and implementing the amendment. Chairperson, to answer this question meaningfully, my point of departure here was that there are a number of decisions I think the committee needs to make. The first decision is the approach that the committee would recommend for amending the number of seats, whether to follow a repeal or a substitution process, because obviously the implications of whether the repeal or the substitution is used will have some knock-on effects. For example, in point 2, should the decision be to use substitution, then the committee will need to make a recommendation of what the number of seats should be. So the repeal process would be a bit simpler. In that case, one would skip step number 2. And then further, once those decisions is made, whether to engage in further public involvement as a result of those decisions. Should the committee decide to engage in further public involvement, and once that public involvement process has been completed, then I think I can, talk a bit more meaningfully about what the proposed timelines could be. Those are, pardon. The first step is the committee deliberations on the version of the bill to be recommended to the House. Give or take, I think that would be about 1 month. So that would be after the public involvement process. The committee should be fairly well informed at that point on the way forward. The second step would be adoption of the bill in the House with a 2/3 majority. And again, I would say about 1 month. And maybe also just pause, Chairperson. These are estimates, but of course these timelines are not in the control of the administration. So the House process may take longer, or it may go quicker. So those are just sort of estimates. The third step would be, once the bill has been adopted in the House, would be to appoint and brief the state attorney or an attorney to prepare papers for application proceedings to the Constitutional Court for certification of the bill and the conclusion of such papers. And there the estimate is about 3 months. The fourth step would be the filing of those papers with the Constitutional Court and the issuing of directives by the Constitutional Court. The estimate is about 2 months. Of course, we don't have any control over the Constitutional Court's processes, but I think it should be about 2 months. Set down and hearing of argument in the Constitutional Court. Again, my estimate is about 9 months. Again, we don't have any control over the Constitutional Court's role and how the Constitutional Court decides to prioritize this particular application. The sixth step, certification by the Constitutional Court or the judgment. I think that should be about 2 months. And then the seventh step would be referral to the Premier for assent, and there the estimate is about 1 month, even though it could be a lot quicker than that. So, Chairperson, on that, the expected duration is about 19 months. I make the comment there at the bottom of the slide that if the process is completed, let me just scroll back. The process I'm referring to, this committee's made a decision on the approach forward, what the number should be, public involvement, etc., and that process has been completed. My estimate is that it should take about 19 months until the bill is certified by the Constitutional Court and assented to by the Premier. Thank you, Chairperson.
Very much. believes Secretary there are other presentations?
Yes, Chairperson, I was just wondering if you can just guide us. Would you want us to deal with the other content issues first, or would you allow for questions from the members first on this presentation, Chairperson?
I would suggest we finish the presentations, but Imogen Spanner, yeah, everyone's nodding. Let's rather finish the presentations and then we can do the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, honourable members. Chairperson, so when the sixth administration had started with the thinking about a review of the number of seats of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. As the administration, we had done a few scenarios in terms of financial implications. The CFO and Mr. Jawadin will just take us through those numbers. We basically had 6 scenarios. We are aware that the committee had asked for another scenario, a 48-member seats. Mr. Jawadin had then also done that exercise, and that will then be part of the information that we share here now. Thank you.
You, Chair, if I may. Just with regards to the financial implications of the different scenarios, as mentioned by the Secretary, there had been quite a few different options of additional members of WCPP. This slide basically provides a summary as to what the financial implications or the effect of increased numbers of members would be based on cost of broken down to 4 categories, which is remuneration, parliamentary work, that is mainly your constituency and secretarial allowances to political parties, members enabling allowances, and then various administrative costs, which could include various IT resources, furniture and equipment, etc. The slides, the first slide summarizes the financial implication of what the additional costing requirements would be if we had an increase of membership by 6 additional seats. And over the MTF for the 3 years, the financial implication for 6 members would be 23 million in the first year, which is the 25-26 year, 20 million in the second year, and 21 million in the third year. These figures obviously would increase by an inflationary amount the further we go on into the MTF, but that's the financial implication for the first scenario, which is 6 additional seats. Then for 8 additional seats, that amounts increased to 29 million, just less than 30 million in 25-26, just less than 27 million in the second year, and then 28 million in the third year. The third scenario speaks to 9 additional seats, and the financial implications in total for that 3 years is 33 million, 30 million, and 31 million, just less than 32 million. The other scenario speaks to 13 additional seats. The financial implication for that over the 3 years is 46 million, 43 million, and 45 million. The next scenario speaks to 18 additional members, additional seats, and the financial implication of the 3 years for that is just less than 62 million, 59 million, and 62 million over the MTF. And then the next scenario, the second last scenario, would be the additional seats, or 23 additional seats, and the financial implication for that is 78 million, 75 million, and 79 million. Then the last scenario, which is the highest of the actual numbers, which is the 30 members, which will take us to a total membership of 72 members if there is an additional 30 members seats, and the financial implication of that over the 3-year MTF period is 101 million, 98 million, and 103 million. Just with regards to funding, through you, Chair, the question was regarding the clarification of funding responsibilities between provincial funding and national funding. During this whole process, and as Advocate Leroux has mentioned, it has been a long process over the past few years. In our deliberations with Provincial Treasury during our normal budgeting processes, there have been quite a few discussions, quite a few robust discussions. Some of these figures were also provided to Provincial Treasury, keeping them in the loop. So Provincial Treasury has been taken through this whole process with regards to the fact that additional funding would be required if there is a decision to increase the number of seats. And that obviously would then be further, the discussion with Provincial Treasury would continue based on any decision made by the committee. With regards to the funding, We receive our budget through the budget, the MTF budgetary process from Provincial Treasury, and as mentioned, that is why we had these discussions in our where we call it our protocol or engagements via the Minister and the Speaker on various engagements with Treasury. And however, the funding source for the additional funding is still upon further determination between Provincial Treasury and National Treasury. So in our discussion with Treasury, they have taken on board our discussions as well as the possible funding requirements, and they have in their deliberations had discussions and a determination needs to be with regards to the sourcing of funding between national or provincial. Chair, that's basically a summary of the costing or financial implications of the additional seats. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson and honourable members, what we have done is we've asked the CFO, has asked the colleagues in the other legislatures to give us an indication of how, especially where there were increases, how they've been funded. We have received a few responses. In some cases, we were just informed that they have received additional funding from Treasury. There was no amounts and for what it was. There was then one of the legislatures who had indicated that they have received additional funding, but that wasn't for all of their costs, the additional costs. I think the one legislature had indicated they got an additional 20 million. The other legislature had indicated they got an additional 45 million through their provincial treasury processes. Not all legislatures have responded to our requests, but that is our colleagues in the other legislatures have indicated. And maybe just a comment on the costing under administration. So while we are able to determine roughly the numbers for items like salaries and constituency allowances and secretarial allowances, because the numbers we have available now, like Mr. Jawadin has indicated, those numbers are also subject to amendments based on CPI increases and obviously other variables. The consideration of increases in public office bearer remuneration is also one of the variables. But when we look at some of the administrative areas that we've costed, let's take, for example, in the IT environment. If we are going to have X number of additional seats, we know it's X number of additional laptops that we're going to have to purchase. But if you look at the issue of licenses, software licenses, those type of items are usually sourced in a cluster. So let's say the cluster is 25 licenses, gets to X amount. And the service provider is only providing the service in those clusters. It means that we are going to have to get additional clusters depending on the number. So that is then not per individual member, but per the clusters that would be required. The same would go for a server. If because of the number that seats will be increased, we now need to purchase an additional server. We can't just purchase one import for a specific member. It would have to be the server. So those are the type of complexities in the administrative environment. Another scenario in the administrative environment would be what impact would the number of seats have on the support staff in the administration. So let's say, for example, the increase in the number of seats would result in, Chairperson, committees operating differently, in the sense that where committees now, because there's members who are on more than one committee, committees can't sit at the same time. But if the number of seats then result in more committees being able to sit at the same time, it would obviously then have an impact on the resources that the administration provides in terms of committee support staff that would have to be provided, because currently the model is also that the committee support staff has more than one committee that the committee support staff is responsible for. Those numbers would become more clearer to us as the number that the committee is thinking of in terms of the possible increase would then assist us in those type of finalizations. Chairperson, I thought maybe just those remarks also to add to the comments. Another matter, Chairperson, that we don't have a presentation for because again, the numbers will determine what input we give in form of a presentation, and written would be the issue of infrastructure. So if we look at the chamber as it is now, it is set up now. We had previously in the 6th parliamentary term, we had engaged the then Department of Transport and Public Works regarding what work could be done in terms of expanding the chamber. The response was because of the heritage nature of the chamber itself and some of the items within the chamber, and also the structures itself. If you break down a wall, and like we say in Afrikaans, as the draamures, then you create problems. So it's a wall that supports some of the other structures. It then becomes a bit of a problem. So they had indicated they wouldn't advise, well, they strongly would not advise an expansion of the chamber. It then gets us with the current seats available, the current seating arrangements and the furniture. It gets us to a maximum of 60 members that could sit. And I've again confirmed and counted this morning, we can make provision in the current seating 30 on the left and 30 on the right. It would, however, mean a purchasing of additional furniture. You would see there's some free empty space at the back. That would then have to be where we would have to put 3 benches, I counted, in order to get 60. We must remember that the number that the committee determines, or the WCPP determines, has to be 6 seats have to be added, because we have 6 permanent delegates at the NCOP, and as has been the practice and the right of the NCOP members to be present in the chamber, we would also have to make provision for that. So if the maximum is 60 with the current furniture and the seating arrangements, it's actually 60 minus 6. That gets us to 54, 55 roughly in that area, Chairperson. Chairperson, the next matter related to infrastructure would be the matter of, and I'm speaking not on behalf of Mr. Titus, he will add any further input, relates to the provision of offices for political parties and then for their support staff. Currently, we only occupy political parties only occupy the 4th floor and the 5th floor. Political parties have already, in the current environment, requested for additional office space for their support staff, which is not possible at the moment because of the way we operate. As the Western Cape Provincial Parliament on the administration side, we had taken the approach from COVID in terms of a hybrid model of operation, which means that all staff don't have to be in the office all of the time. It then allows the opportunity for various options, including the option of hot desking, where 5 people would occupy an open plan if they are not in the office at the same time, and the hot desking approach is applied. You might need a smaller space than the 5 dedicated desks and space for individuals. Okay, if that is an option that could also be explored across the board in terms of both the administration, but also in the political party arena, we could look at options on how the current infrastructure would be able to assist us, depending again on the number. If the committee goes to the maximum of currently 74, because the IEC had determined 7.4 million before the elections, and if you look at the formula, it gets us to 74. It's going to be quite a bit of a challenge, because it means from 42 to 74 gets us 32 members. Those members still have to get support staff in the areas, and that might have a greater impact on the support staff that we would need to provide. The example that I used in terms of the way committees work in terms of the space itself. Chairperson, I'm going to stop there for now and see whether Mr. Titus have any further comments related to infrastructure.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Adams. I think you've covered most of it. Most of it was covered, Chair. I think the only other thing that I probably want to emphasize is that contingent on the number of seats, there is the project of having to optimize actual floor space and modernizing the actual floor space within our offices and within the WCPP. And I think that is a project. It's possibly quite a huge project, but that will obviously be contingent on the numbers that we are talking about. I think Mr. Adams mentioned the issue around the benefits, the value benefits of the hybrid service delivery model. And there are some efficiency gains that we can gain from that particular process, where we are able to conduct business within the hybrid setting. I think everything else the secretary has spoken to. I think the other issue is that our current desks and floor spaces as we use them currently within the WCPP is not in line with what is happening in the rest of the province within the Western Cape government, and not on standard for the kind of desks that are being used. So there's a lot more space that we are taking up. And this is a possibility for us to see to what extent we can modernize through even looking at rearranging the floor spaces that we're currently using. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that it for the presentations?
Yes, Chairperson.
Thank you. So we can move to some questions. Just before I take hands, I just want to ask one question. Can you just remind us the last time, or when the size of the WCPP was determined, what the population of the Western Cape was at that date, and where we know now it's what, 7.2. Can you just let us know then, if you can just remind us exactly of the original composition as we are now, the 42, and what the population size was then?
Thank you, Chairperson, and Advocate Leroux can assist me. I think it was in 1999, and the population was 3.9 at the time. Maybe just, Chairperson, the IEC in their documents had determined at the time when they had gazetted the proposals, had determined that the population of the Western Cape was 7.4. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Okay, I've got some questions, but let's kick off with the committee. I have got Member Kaiser Philander, then I have Member Stevens, Member Said, Member Walters, and then I'm not seeing any hands online, but if you could just indicate, as I'm sure there will be. Let's start off with Member Kaiser Philander.
Chairperson, thank you very much. I wish to draw the attention to slide numbers 8 and 9, the presentation given by Advocate Leroux. Just perhaps to provide clarity in terms of the two latter statements on or bullet points on slide 8, which indicates that effect can only be given to a change in the number of seats after provincial election. Hence, the current balance of seats will only change after an election. And the subsequent slide giving an indication of timelines on slide 11. Given that the process in one commences in February 2026, the entire process is estimated to be completed by end of September 2027. Chair, just perhaps for my information and knowledge, which of it is it? Can this process in actual fact be completed, or is it in fact, as the presentation also states, only after provincial election? I know we're after provincial election now, but is it, immediately after an election? I just need clarity on that. And then, Chair, thank you for the cost implications provided as well, bearing in mind the Secretary's comment with regards to other legislatures receiving additional information. My question would then just be, in terms of the specific legislature, what is the cost in terms of allocated seats that this Parliament can afford, given the process that needs to be embarked on? Thank you, Chair.
Member Stevens, is it okay if we take, should we say, two sets of questions, answer, and then we go on to the next two members? That's okay. Member Stevens?
Member Philander covered two of my questions, but the other one was the population growth and demographic changes considered when determining the seats? That's the other question.
If we could just have the response to that, and then we'll move on to Member Said and Member Walters.
Chairperson, I'm going to ask Advocate Leroux to just respond to Honourable Lander's question on slides 8 and 9, and then we will attend to the other questions.
Chair, thank you. On slide 8, yes, as the slide indicates, and the member can correct me if I misunderstood the question. I think maybe I should refer to the bill also as it stands at present. So the first process is to effect an amendment to the provincial constitution. But we were also mindful of the fact when we drafted the bill that once the constitution is amended, there is still a separate process that needs to take place to give effect to that. So there was some questions as to how we deal with that. So if the bill, for example, becomes an act, it's assented to in 2027, how do we determine when it comes into effect? And the decision at the time was to, and I'll quickly read the clause 2 as it reads at present, because it reads, this act is called the Constitution of the Western Cape Amendment Act, Determination of Numbers 2023, and takes effect on the day before the first day of polling for the next provincial parliament. So the thinking was for the bill to take effect, even though it's been assented to by the Premier at some previous point in time, but for the bill to take effect once this legislature's term ends in terms of the Constitution, that the amendment will take effect, and then the amendment will be implemented by the IEC in terms of the relevant schedules of the Electoral Act. Then on slide 11, just check my notes here quickly. I think the answer I gave now answers that question as well. Thank you, Chair.
Chairperson, so just following on Advocate Leroux's response. So practically speaking, if we take the content of the presentation into account in terms of all of the processes that would need to be followed, including the certification by the Constitutional Court, we could get to September 2027. The next provincial and national elections only happens in 2029, which would be roughly 2 years from September 2027. If the 7th administration of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament continues, the 7th parliamentary term continues until the next election in 2029, that is when the new number then becomes effective. There is, however, another option, but that option for it to happen sooner, and Advocate Leroux had touched on that earlier, it involves the dissolution of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. Okay? But then there needs to be another provincial election, and then from there onwards, the number could then become effective. Okay, so those are the two options. Ordinarily, if nothing else happens, the Constitution gets certified, we get to September 2027, we will wait until the 2029 provincial and national elections for the number to become effective. Thank you. Chairperson, there was then also a question from Honourable Philander on the costing in terms of the specific legislature. What is the cost in terms of the allocated seats that WCPP can afford? Any number of additional seats other than the 42 that we currently have will necessitate additional funding to provide it to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. There is the issue of direct charges, so that goes for the salaries. Then we have the allowances that we provide in terms of constituency allowance, secretarial allowance, and the members enabling allowance. And depending on the number, it could have possible financial implications for us to rework the office accommodation, the accommodation space in terms of the options that Mr. Titus had indicated. So let's just, and I'm just trying to be practical, let's say the number of increase is 13. I think there's an option of 13. And I'm not steering the committee in a specific direction. I just want to give the practicalities. 13, that gets us to 55. I had indicated that the seating arrangements would be 60. 60 minus the 6 gets us 54 in terms of the seating arrangement. We would just have to look for one more space for us to get to the 61 to make accommodation for the NCOP delegates also. So that's the chamber itself. The 55 gets us an additional 13 members in terms of the office space on the 4th floor and on the 5th floor. If the model that the political parties elect is a continuation of the current model in terms of one office for one member, it means we are going to have to look for 13 additional offices that we currently don't have. Okay, an additional 13 members is likely to change the way committees program their work now, 13 members, which means that we might have to look, well, I'm saying it is feasible that we would have to look at the support staff in terms of the numbers we provide for committee staff, even if it is just 1 or 2 additional procedural officers that we are going to need, because with an additional 13 members, there is the possibility that committees who are currently now not sitting at the same time would be sitting at the same time because there's no overlap in terms of membership, and therefore we are going to need to have support staff to deal with both of the work of those committees. A number of 13 could also have an impact on the support staff in the administration. Let's look at members' affairs, for example. There's currently only 2 support staff and 1 supervisor. An increase to 55 seats 55 seats means that our members' affairs office, with the 2 plus 1 staff members, we might have to bolster them so that we can provide support to all 55 instead of the 42 that we currently have available. So Member Philander, some of the answers to the question is a what if, because the number will determine what we would need to put in place in order to deal with that. I think the like I had indicated, the only certainty could be the chamber, because we can count the number of seats. There is another option, Chairperson and members, related to the chamber. A reconfiguration of seating arrangements within the chamber. These benches are quite big. If we do a reconfiguration, we could get more than 60 members in the chamber itself. Okay, but that is also going to cost, because it will be once-off cost in terms of new furniture. The steps and those type of things might have to be smoothed out, etc. in terms of that area. But if we look at the chamber would be able to take 60 plus 161 members in its current configuration, because the only thing we would need to do is to add additional benches where there's space there at the back, and that should assist us in terms of that. I don't know if Mr. Titus or the CFO would want to add any more responses to the question on the costing for this specific legislature.
Nothing from my side. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And then the question from Honourable Stevens is, was the population growth considered in determining the number of seats for the WCPP? The last time the number of seats was determined for the Western Cape Provincial Parliament was in 1999, when the population was 3.9, and it was determined as 42 seats. The legislation makes provision for that determination to happen before every election, provincial and national election. In the case of the other provincial legislatures, it's the work of the IEC. In the case of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, because the contents of our current constitution, it's an exercise for the Western Cape Provincial Parliament to do. I must say, Chairperson, that if we look at 3.9 in 1999 and 42, and the growth over the years, the numbers have not taken into account that growth from 3.9 to 7.4. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Member Sahid. I just want to quickly, I think you did answer it actually indirectly. Just the concern I had about certification, you were talking about the IEC being able to increase the other parliaments prior to, or the other legislatures prior to an election. Presumably then they don't have to go through the certification process. This would be unique to the Western Cape because it has a constitution. But you can come back to that. Member Sayed?
Thank you very much. I'm largely covered in terms of, because my question was going to be similar to that of Member Philander around the timing issue, because I asked that, I think you would recall previously. I just wanted to get a sense then, maybe if we could then be furnished with the legal basis for that, to say, what's the legal basis for the need for there to be a dissolution of provincial parliament and then a fresh election for the seats to be increased, or I mean for the implementation of the seat increase to come into effect. I wanted to get that sense, because I'm just, I mean, and mine is not from a legal perspective. I'm sure the legal people could assist, because my understanding is that the determination of the number of seats is not necessarily based on the amount of registered voters that we have in an election, how many people vote, this, that. The actual voting in an election determines which parties get which amount of seats, not necessarily the amount of seats that we have in a legislature. The amount of seats is determined by the population, which is not necessarily dependent on an election. So I just wanted to get, because I've been looking at the Act from yesterday, and the Act seems a little bit silent. Maybe I'm not reading the Act correctly. Perhaps I could be assisted in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Member Walters.
Chair, essentially what I'm hearing is, well, I think this population size clearly justifies an increase of the legislature, yeah. And I think in my mind, it's really the cost implication in a economically distressed time that we need to consider. And it, in my thinking, and it's more comment, and I would like to hear whether this is off the mark. I think it's important that the Western Cape has a constitution and that it can control, I nearly want to say, the expenses around increasing the size. I'm not in favor of just essentially handing it to the IEC, because it's important to manage all the costs and have some kind of control over expenditure there, given our budgetary constraints. So what it sounds like to me is a constitutional amendment. And Chair, I think there seems to be broad agreement that an increase is necessary, but we limit it. I think the lowest number that we have is 48. And it seems like we all agree that that is more or less the way we're aiming. And I would imagine that a constitutional amendment should make it easier to amend that aspect of the Constitution going forward. So I think it's important that we have the ability in the Western Cape to increase the democratic space. I don't think we should decrease it. That we should limit in a clause, but at the same time manage the kind of, because we're not in control of our own revenue, we should be able to control in terms of increases the budgetary impact. That is what I take out of the presentation. Now, does that make sense? If we put a constitutional amendment, I think we have clarity in terms of the period it will take. But does that make sense that a possible wording of a constitutional clause should allow for an easier increase in the future, that we're not stuck here with the same kind of problem every time, the population grows? Is that something that legally there would be a problem? In my mind, there shouldn't be, As long as we don't decrease it below 42 and we don't increase it beyond what the ISC's sort of benchmark, that there should be flexibility between those points. And I think that then will put the Western Cape in a position where we're not stuck where we are now, and at the same time have control over expenditure and proper accountability in that regard. Does that make sense? Are there any pitfalls or any blind spots in what I'm saying?
Thank you, Chairperson, for the two questions. I think both of those are actually legal questions, so I'm going to allow Advocate Leroux just to respond. But maybe Honourable Walters, just a question of clarity from my side. Did I hear correctly that your question is, can we put a mechanism in the amendment that allows for an automatic increase on a similar basis without the WCPP going through a process than what we're going through now?
No, Chair, I'm actually not suggesting an automatic increase. What I'm suggesting is a measured, well-considered increase that is easier than the process that we are following now, and that we work that into the Constitution. So every time we want to increase the House, obviously you must limit it in terms of how big you can make it. And I don't believe we should be making it smaller, most certainly not. But to make the process easier, that we can adjust to an increasing population, but keeping an eye on the expenditure, given that we don't have, we essentially we're vulnerable to national dynamics in terms of the fiscal space. So that's what I'm mulling in my mind.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Advocate Leroux. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Secretary. On the first question, firstly, if the committee wants some more particulars after this answer, something in writing, that's fine. The reason, well, let me rather start here. Even though we can provide for the number of members of the legislature in a provincial constitution, that's settled and the Constitutional Court settled that. It is also so that we cannot provide for an electoral system. So the provision of the numbers in the provincial constitution is the one issue, but we have an electoral system established in terms of the Electoral Act. And I think the members will be very familiar with especially the Schedules 1 and the Schedules 1A. So once the determination of the number of seats have been made, whatever that number may be, there's quite a number of processes. But in part of those processes is after an election, there's a process to count the vote and to do the designations and the allocations. And that process is statutorily provided for in the Electoral Act. So once the election result is made available, they use the droop quotation or something like that to determine out of, let's say, the 70 seats, these are the allocations to particular parties, and these are the specific members that those seats will be allocated to. I think that's a short answer to the question of, even though the provincial constitution can provide for that number, it is the electoral system that gives effect to that. That's on the first question. I understand the second question. It's almost, the way I understand it, is almost a suggestion to use something like the formulaic approach. I say that because that's the way I understand the question, that there would be a single amendment to the provincial constitution, and that once that amendment has been made, we won't need to amend the provincial constitution to change the number going forward, to just simplify the process. And I think that was one of the benefits of the formulaic approach, and I suppose that's why the committee initially seemed to prefer that approach. And that was also the first draft of the bill. So the first draft provided that the number of seats would be 1 seat for every 100,000 residents of the province, and that is effectively determined by the House in the rules and orders, etc., etc. And that's what I understood that question to suggest. I will not say it's a bit of a tricky answer. My opinion is that the formulaic approach would pass constitutional muster. But the reality is that this is now one of those situations where a number of lawyers have a number of different opinions on that very point, because there are other opinions that the first draft would not pass constitutional muster. So relying on the formulaic approach, we create a bit of a grey area. I may have a view what the Constitutional Court will find. Another lawyer has a different view of what the Constitutional Court will find. And we have to approach the Constitutional Court assuming that bit of a risk that we're not quite sure how the Constitutional Court would approach it. Because there's the issue of, it's clear that we can provide for the number of members constitutionally in our provincial constitution. But now we get into these legal gymnastics. What does the word provide mean? As opposed to determine, if the House itself determines the number of seats, is it still the provincial constitution? All those kind of interpretational issues that come up. So the answer simply was, the formulaic approach is an option, but there is a risk to the formulaic approach. We're not sure whether the Constitutional Court would accept that. And the benefit of the substitution approach and the repeal approach is that the Constitutional Court already explicitly in the initial judgment nearly 30 years ago made it clear what the Constitutional Court's views on that approach is. So I'm not saying the formulaic approach is necessarily unconstitutional. My own opinion is it is not, but there are different opinions. And we don't know what the Constitutional Court would find. And therefore, my suggestion would be that there are other options, the substitution option or the repeal option, where we can approach the court on virtually no risks, those issues already having been decided. But the member is correct. If we do a substitute, let's say we follow a substitution approach, and 5 or 10 years from now, the legislature wants to change that number again, then that will again require a constitutional amendment, which is a much more cumbersome process.
Thank you. I'll come to Member Bryant now. I just want to check with the procedural officer. Are there any hands online? No. Member Bryant?
Thank you, Chairperson. And it's good to be attending as an alternate. It's very interesting, but I think also very important discussion. I just would like to make one point, which is we have to remember the core reason why one would want to increase members in a legislature/parliament. And that is to increase your oversight capacity. At present, and it was quite a shock for me when I arrived at provincial parliament to find that the majority party has 6, sometimes 7 committees per member that one has to attend. And it's not about workload. It's about the fact that it is very, very difficult to conduct rigorous oversight within each of those committees because one has to attend so many. And it simply shouldn't be the case. It should be the case that a member is allocated to 1, maybe 2 committees and really, really gets their teeth into what's happening on those committees. So I think any decision that is taken should be in the interest of ensuring that we have enough members to fill those committees without members having to sit on 6, 7, 8 committees. One can understand the way the cookie crumbles. Unfortunately, if you're a much smaller party, that's just the way it is. You have to move yourself between the different committees, but that simply shouldn't be the case for majority party or even the official opposition to be in that situation. So I think any number that we consider should really have that as the central focus, because our core responsibility is oversight, obviously, and legislation. Just in terms, Mr. Rue, your presentation, page 11, the first point where you spoke about the proposed timelines and that committee deliberations on the version of the bill to be recommended to the House about 1 month. Committee deliberations, Chair, maybe you can advise, is this the committee deliberations today? And are we going to adopt a resolution at the end of today's meeting? Or is there going to be a subsequent session before this goes to the House? And if so, I think it's going to be a a very big decision to make today. But that's just my opinion. I'm not an official member. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just in addition, I've just got a couple of questions that I think I'll just pop in now because they do stem to a certain extent from Member Brian's questions. Talking about the National Treasury and the history of the matter, you said, Mr. Secretary, we haven't yet managed to get that information. What information exactly is it that we require, and what are the chances that we will be able to acquire that information within the next couple of weeks? And that ties into Member Brian's question about the issue of the deliberations. So I just want to know if that is critical information. It also ties into the issue of funding. You mentioned that one legislature got 20 million and another legislature got 40 million. Given the relatively large increases that the IEC has allowed in some of the other provinces, I'm wondering if the committee would also be interested in I think the best way to describe it would be a comparative analysis of the finances about where money is coming from, who is getting extra money and who isn't. I think that is quite a critical question. Let's say, for example, one followed a formula whereby one suddenly increases by, let's say, 18. The financial implications would be extremely large for the Western Cape PP, and one would want to then understand what is happening in other provinces. So I think it might be quite important to get that comparative if one is able to get that information. Because ultimately, I think Member Walters is right. It really comes down to finances. Then, so it's those two issues, the National Treasury, the history of the matter, the funding that is going to other provinces. Then also from the information we received from Mr. Leroux and also Member Said's question, do we still need or do we need a legal opinion on the effective date of the increase? And in the amendment that potentially would eventually be moved, does one need to include the date when the amendment would become effective vis-a-vis the election? Or is that considered to be automatic in terms of the next election date? If it's clear, it's rather clumsy, but if that is clear. So I just want to know about the effective date. And then also, we've had two decisions historically. One was to follow the formulaic approach, and then that was subsequently changed to a certain number. There was public participation, and eventually the previous administration, this committee under the previous administration, agreed on 6. I just want to find out, because ultimately one does need to close the gate on continually deliberating. Has anything substantively changed since that decision was made? And obviously that lapsed with the end of the last parliament. Have the facts changed particularly? And if the committee were to make a different decision, would it potentially have ramifications for any possible appeals? Thank you.
Chairperson, thank you. I'm going to ask Advocate Leroux just to assist on the question of the legal opinion, but maybe just the following, the National Treasury input. So, Chairperson, it was deemed, well, it was deemed that the information that Treasury would have provided, or the input that Treasury would have provided, the National Treasury, that is, to the IEC, on the intention to increase, would have spoken to the issue of affordability, would have spoken to other issues related to costing and financial implications. And that's why, as the Secretary and the Accounting Officer, I had approached the IEC to ask whether they can provide us with that input that Treasury had made. The request has been coming from 2024. We are already in March 2025, and like I said, I had also requested the provincial head of the IEC to assist us with the national colleagues, but we've not yet received any input. I think it's almost been longer than than 6 months. Well, it's definitely been longer than 6 months because the elections was in May 2024, and the colleague from the IEC province has been attempting. He has been escalating it to the national office, but nothing has been forthcoming at this stage. Chairperson, the comparative analysis we had, it was our intention to do a quick and dirty exercise of a comparative analysis. And that's why we had asked the colleagues in the other provinces. Like I had indicated earlier, only 3 of those provincial legislatures had assisted, with only 2 giving us the numbers in terms of what? The 20 and the 45. So on the basis of the increase in numbers of those 2 legislature seats, a quick calculation would say that the additional cost per member ranged from 2.1 million to 2.8 million. And that's the additional cost given the number of increases in those specific legislatures. We have no idea of what the variables were that were taken into account. If Chairperson and the members have seen our spreadsheet, there's an item indicator that we had given when we got to the actual cost per the scenarios. Chairperson, we can attempt again for the other legislatures to ask them for this information. It's however not within our control to say when they will provide us, because the CFO had also made some follow-ups from our previous request. In terms of the legal opinion, I'm going to allow Advocate Leroux maybe just to give some insights in a response to that question.
Chair, thank you. Ultimately, it's for the committee to decide after my answer whether the committee would want something in addition to that. Chairperson, I would say the issue from a legal perspective, the issue of when the Act comes into effect, I think is fairly uncontroversial, by which I mean from after the public involvement process and the various inputs we got from including government and other inputs. It does not appear to be a controversial issue, but just to maybe elaborate on that a little bit. So the question is how to deal with, because obviously if the effective date is not dealt with, there may be implications for the legislature. We have a provincial constitution that says there's 48 members, but in fact there's only 42 members in the legislature until the next election, and suddenly there's a whole lot of challenges. These decisions were unlawful, the legislature was not properly constituted, etc., etc. So it's very important to get that right. Whenever the Act is assented to by the Premier, it's important to get the question right of when that amendment actually becomes effective. And the thinking was, and the wording used in the bill is basically taken out of the Constitution itself, Section 108 sub 4. It's a short subsection, so I'll read it. A provincial legislature remains competent to function from the time it is dissolved or its term expires until the day before the first day of polling for the next legislature. So the thinking was for the amendment to only take effect once the ability of this legislature to do its work comes to an end. At that exact point in time, the constitutional amendment comes into effect, and the new legislature is then constituted as provided for in the amendment. And that's also, as I've read the bill earlier, that's the exact same wording that's used in the bill as it is at present. Chair?
Thank you very much. I want to just find out, do we have any follow-up questions? We've got Member Said. Okay, please proceed.
No, Chair, thank you. I want to thank the advocate for the response, especially with regards to my question on the issue of the timing. I think he's speaking more to the bill. I've still not, and I haven't heard, and hence I want to then maybe agree with something which you've alluded to. Perhaps we need an actual legal opinion on the issue about the implementation of the amendment, because he's speaking now to the issue of the bill. The bill is something that we are crafting here. it's not necessarily something that's already a form of legislation or that's been passed and even been assented to by the Premier. Because I'm still not convinced that if a constitutional amendment is made during the 7th administration, that we ought to then, or that we are legally bound to wait until the 8th administration for it to be implemented. Because if we are saying it's also based on serving the citizens and the capacity, then why should those 1:100, for example, be waiting for a new administration when it already says in the constitution? So I'm just saying, perhaps we actually need an actual legal opinion on the matter, which speaks to the Electoral Act and not necessarily the bill, because the bill is something that we are still working on. Thank you.
Any other follow-up questions? And just also to possibly remind you, the advocate, about my question about the previous administration making a decision. If nothing has substantively changed, would a different decision based on the same facts result in a potential appealable position?
Thank you, Chair. First, it's no issue to make a written opinion available to the committee. If I may, I just want to confirm the legal question. We always, as lawyers, we always just want to be clear on what exactly is the legal question. So I want to confirm that with the committee, and then we can make a written opinion available. My understanding is the legal question is the following. In giving effect to the Act, can the Act be given effect to without reliance on the Electoral Act? Is there some other process that so,
Member Sayed?
Yeah, no. My question, it's a simple one. Can the amendment be implemented and given effect during the 7th administration without an election needing to take place?
I think if I could suggest, that does seem to be the flipped version of what has just been articulated. It's exactly the same question. Would that be clear to you, Advocate Leroux?
it's clear to me. Thank you, Chairperson. And Chair, your second question that you asked?
If the previous administration, this committee under the previous administration, made a decision on a certain set of facts, which was the, I think it was a substitution rather than the, yeah, it was essentially a substitution on a certain number. If nothing has substantively changed, other than the fact that there now is a new administration, so it lapsed, which is why it is before us again, would a different decision by this committee result in potential problems going forward, essentially?
Chairperson, it wouldn't. This committee and this House is entitled to make the policy decision that it wants to make. No final decision has been made yet. No bill has been passed. I cannot comment on whether, I don't know whether that was a question, the facts have materially changed. I was present in that committee meeting and there wasn't a clear presentation of what that decision was based on. So whether the underlying thinking changed or the facts on which that decision was based changed, I cannot comment on.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions at this point? Anything online? Not. Look, I don't want to kick the can down the road, but I also want to be sure that we do properly air everyone's concerns on this, because it is an important decision that will have ramifications going forward. I do like the suggestion of the legal opinion. I just want to get a feeling from the committee if they would be in agreement with that. What I would also like to ask for is, if possible, I do understand the difficulties, if possible, a comparative analysis of the funding issues with the other provinces. I think that particularly with the two provinces that are receiving the 20 million and the 45 million, you mentioned a third province that is not receiving any funding. I'd be interested to know why that is. And then if I may, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you would be able to ask speakers in other provinces to possibly be amenable to assisting us in terms of their financial models with their increases. As I say, some of them like Gauteng and I think KZN have seen quite market increases. So I think it will be interesting to see how that would be funded, particularly given the financial constraints we have at the moment. Would the committee be opposed to us asking for that in a further meeting? Any objections to that? As I say, we do need to close the gate at some point, but I do want us to air concerns because this is an important decision going forward. So I just want to find, would that be an acceptable way of going forward at this particular point? Thank you. Okay, so if we could please ask then that, I know we keep asking for further presentations, but essentially on the issue of the legal opinion, because I think that that is something members would like to satisfy themselves on. It also speaks to, I think, essentially a lot of the issue why people are here. So I think that that's important. And then a comparative financials would be extremely useful if we could possibly get that. And then I think that that resolves that matter. Anything else from your sides?
Chairperson, maybe just an input on the third legislature. They had only indicated that they had received an increase. They didn't say what the number is, Chairperson, and not that they didn't get an increase, Chairperson.
It would be extremely useful if we could possibly get that information. I don't think it's confidential at all. I mean, it's a matter of public record, the finances, so it would be interesting. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, if I may make a suggestion, that if the committee, based on the resolution of the House, because that's why we are here, there is the House took a resolution that we revive the bill at a certain point, and those facts are available to the committee. The decisions taken in the past forms part of that resolution that the House took, I think about in the beginning of just when we started. So I want to make a suggestion, Chair, from going forward, that the principal decision about where we are going as a committee with regards to this bill should be taken by the committee, and then the administration would provide the necessary support to obtain all those nuts and bolts and the technical information that you need, because it's going to keep the committee very busy having to look for those technical information which the administration would be able to provide. So if the committee could look at the facts presented to them, have what they have in front of them, then make the decision, principal decision about the way forward, and then based on that, the administration provides the all the other technical information.
Thanks very much. I just want to find out, are there any questions to the Speaker about that resolution? If I could just ask exactly how you would suggest that we then structure that to ensure that we include those issues.
All right. So I don't know if the committee has deliberated whether or not to proceed with this bill. So that's a committee decision that needs to first be taken. The committee has then taken the decision to proceed with the bill in its form and with the facts in front of it, to then through the procedural officer then request the administration, i.e. the legal opinion, the financial implications, the engagement with National Treasury, the infrastructure needs that is linked to that decision. But I don't want to cloud your decision making by all these other technical things that is important for a decision, but the principle of, is there an appetite for this, and if so, what support the administration then can provide.
Okay, I think that is relatively clear. Member Walters?
Yeah, my sense is we should proceed. I think that is certainly the sense I get from the conversation, that members must speak for themselves. My feeling is we must proceed, and the rest is actually about improving whatever the outcome is that we produce. But to me, that is the one thing that is apparent. We should proceed.
Thank you. Member Syed?
Chair, I want to agree with Member Walters, yeah, I think we should proceed. This is the sense I'm getting in terms of the majority of us. But within that proceeding, we've got certain issues. We may not necessarily all agree, or maybe we will in the end, on the details. So issues, even when I raise the issue about implementation, the timeline, when during the administration or after, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying let's not proceed. Let's proceed. Those are issues that can be part of the process and part of the discussion, which shapes the final product. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other hands, Procedure Officer? Okay. All right. At this point,
Chairperson, my hand has been up.
yes. Sorry. Yes. Please go ahead, Member Heron.
Mayor, I just wanted to jump in after the speaker's input, and maybe to go slightly back to Member Brian's input. I don't know how people read the room that we are all in agreement that we go ahead. I think what we've had is inputs from legal and the financial implications, which can inform what resolution we take on this. But ultimately, the question for the committee has got nothing to do with the administration. And the committee has not sat down and discussed what problem we are trying to solve. And to just say, let's proceed because a committee in the 6th administration made a recommendation to increase the seats to 48, I don't think is a basis for saying let's proceed. I also don't think that a purely mathematical calculation, and one member per 100,000 or one member per 150,000 member population is a basis for proceeding. And I don't think that we can proceed without the information that has been asked for to make the political decision about whether to proceed to revive this bill or whatever the question is. Because in the context of the current fiscal constraints in our country, in our own provincial parliament, to be talking about adding an extra 20 or 30 million rand a year to the provincial bill just doesn't make sense. I mean, Chairperson, last week in the SOPA debate, you asked if members of the parliament were willing to give up their salaries to fund teachers. And now we're talking about 20 million, 30 million. I mean, the financial implications are very serious. And we can't make a financial argument to the public unless we're very clear about what problem we're trying to solve. And if we are saying as a parliament that we're not coping with exercising oversight, then that's a debate that we must have as politicians without the administration. And I'm ready to have that debate because I don't think that we are so overstretched that we need to add extra members. So that's my view, or our view as a party. But I don't think we're in a place to proceed yet because the implications, what contribution we may get from the national fiscus needs to be part of the consideration. And I mean, even a contribution from the national fiscus is still a drain on the fiscus. It's going to, that funding that's going to come to us to add extra 6 members is going to take away funding from another program or project. And are we willing to say we need these extra 6 members and some other program must sacrifice their funding? So for those who are saying that we must now resolve to proceed without a debate of the members, without these technical presentations, I think is premature. And the questions that have been asked of the administration are important to inform the balance between the problem we're trying to solve and the cost that would be incurred in trying to solve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Member Walters, I mean, Member Wendy Philander. Member Walters.
Chair, I think there's a distinction between taking a principled decision to proceed and then as we go through the process and if there's call it onerous cost implications, all the things that Member Heron is raising, that means that we then end up either not voting for it or not implementing it at a particular stage. But can I just point out this matter I recall, I wasn't even in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. I recall this matter already being on the table when I was in the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. Now, I don't want to dismiss any of the points Member Heron is making. I think it's very important points, but there's also the cost of non-action, term after term after term, where it is the population nearly doubled since the original seat number was established. So that is a reality. I think nobody can deny that that is out of kilter, certainly with practice elsewhere. Now, what I'm proposing is that we don't dilly-dally with this, that we proceed with it. It's up to this committee to manage, either not supporting it in the end, or alternatively managing when it gets implemented, when there's maybe a different fiscal environment. So Member Heron's input can be accommodated within a principled decision to proceed. His input, unfortunately, cannot be accommodated if we are not going to proceed. That effectively stops the process. And I think we need to be clear on that.
Thank you. Member Kaiser-Palanda?
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to add my voice in terms of that I agree that we proceed. I think we shouldn't lose mind of the fact that proceeding today and the other committee meetings that will come, there was a process. And the committee at the time concluded that the number of seats is no longer adequate to optimally represent the people of the Western Cape. That is the crux of the matter. Chairperson, I would just like to have guidance from you in this regard. Also emanating from then is the number of seats of 48, which means an increase of 6. Based on what we are asking subsequent to today's meeting, are we then in actual fact, when we say the basis of what we are working on, are we then working on 48 instead of the administration coming back on various numbers that we work on the determination that was then concluded by the committee at that time and resolved? If I can just have clarity on that, Chair.
Thank you. I just want to quickly ask Member Van Wyk. He's got his hand up.
Thanks, Chair. I've been listening to the debate, and I must say that I think we've come to the conclusion in saying that we need to increase by 6. Now, and I support that. And I think ultimately one of the considerations that we need to take into account relate, on the one hand, to population, and how do we then properly represent the increase in population in terms of the workload that we have. I'm not convinced that one just merely needs to increase the numbers of your members for every 100,000 increase in population, because I don't believe you can be effective by simply just increasing the size of the house constantly on 100,000. You then need to look at how effective you are going to be with a smaller house on the one side and the increase that we are proposing. And certainly it would seem to me that the increase that we need is justified in terms of some of the issues that were, for instance, raised by Member Bryant. So at the same time, one can't, in the fiscally constrained times that we are living, also just keep increasing the size of your house without taking into account the costs involved. So I think we've got on the one hand, we've got to work within the amount of money that we have available, so that we don't create that additional burden, and at the same time making sure that the work that we are doing is done a lot more effectively. And in that regard, I think we do need that level of increase. We probably then need to try and wrap up on the technical and the legal issues as has been suggested so far. So I think the process that we are following, I'm generally in support of that. Thank you.
Okay, if I could please make a proposal, listening to the members of the committee and also taking on board Member Heron's concerns, which I think are not by any means baseless. I think there are issues that we do need to consider. Would the committee be happy if we agree as a resolution to proceed with the process of dealing with the bill as it has been, or the matter as it has been referred to us, and within the envelope of that, to ask for the further presentations that we have asked, which would be the legal report on the effective date, as well as the issues of finance, particularly from National Treasury, taking into account what's happening with the other provinces. And further, and I'm not saying this to limit any debate, as a rough working sketch, the previous decision to increase by 6, but within our agreement to proceed with this bill, that we then take into account the constrained fiscal environment in which we are operating, so that when we receive the further presentations, we can then debate what the way forward with this would be. I'm trying to sort of be as open as possible in terms of the resolution to sort of cover all the bases. Would that be acceptable to the members of the committee? Are there objections to that? I see I've got Member Walters and I've got Member Heron. Member Walters?
Chair, I agree there's legitimate concerns. Nobody's trying to dismiss them. At the same time, what we don't want is an undue delay that it goes into another term, goes into, it becomes quite a drawn out process. We mustn't unduly dilly-dally. I think your proposal, is the best compromise. I'm certainly comfortable with it.
Thank you. Member Heron?
Thank you, Chair. I would propose the complete opposite. I don't think that this committee should adopt that we proceed with this bill until we understand the questions that we asked of the administration, and in particular, the contribution that was made to other legislatures in order to meet the costs. Were those part of the provincial equitable share? Was it additional funding? Is the funding sustained every financial year? Was it a once-off payment? I don't see why we need to, simply because a previous committee resolved that 48 is the number, the appropriate number for the size of this legislature, that we are now bound to follow that route. So if the committee wants to resolve to proceed with this bill, I do not support that. Thank you.
I think given the support that we do have for such a resolution, if I may, Mr. Speaker, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I think, and when I said when I made the proposal about the principal decision, the House took a resolution for the bill to be revived in its current form. The bill was referred to this committee for consideration and deliberation. The principal decision is whether or not you continue on whether you continue or not. So the resolution by this committee can also be that there is no increase, and then that is the report to the House, because the committee is now obligated by that resolution to report to the House. So the nuts and the bolts and the technical things are important. Nobody's disputing that. But the principal decision the committee needs to take, whether or not the committee increases the number of seats or propose to the House for a number of seats increase or not, the committee must still report to the House. And that's so I don't know if we maybe miscommunicated past one another. But it's part of the legislative process that needs to be followed.
Okay, may I suggest, because I think this is now debate and we really don't need the department to be here. I'm sure they have things to do. May I suggest that we, at this point, take a break. It's now 11:15 until 11. At 11, the committee returns. And if I could please ask the procedural officer to try to panel beat the resolution as suggested into something that isn't committing us to anything. At that point, we can then proceed with it if it has the majority support. If Member Heron or anybody else objects, we can then note that objection as part of that. And then we can proceed after that to do some housekeeping matters. Would that be acceptable to everyone? Because then we can also excuse the department. Thanks, and we'll come back at 11. Thank you very much, and we can excuse you unless you'd like to join us for a cup of tea or something like that. Thank you. written. And then because we do need to move forward at some point, we can then either agree or disagree. So, okay. If everyone can hear me, this is the proposed resolution. The committee resolves to proceed with the process of deliberating on the Western Cape Constitutional Amendment Bill. To inform future deliberations, the WCPP is requested to provide 1, a written legal opinion on the effective date for implementing any changes to the number of seats, and 2, comparative cost implications from other legislatures in terms of an increase in their seats. Do people have any suggestions as to how to knock this into shape?
Chairperson, if you don't mind, can you perhaps just repeat your first part of the recommendation, please?
Okay. The committee resolves to proceed with the process of deliberating on the Western Cape Constitutional Amendment Bill.
Chair, can I just suggest, based on the principle, can we perhaps just include that the number of seats in the WCPP be increased? Because I think that is also a principle that members agreed on, if I heard them correctly.
Okay. Then we could resolve, the committee resolves to proceed with the process of deliberating on the increase of the Western Cape. Let me rephrase that, it's not going out right. The committee resolves to proceed with the process of deliberating on the Western Cape Constitutional Amendment Bill and the potential increase in seats. Would that work? To inform future deliberations, the WCPP is requested to provide, and then the rest of it. Okay. Have we got objections? Have we got any amendments suggested to that beyond the one we've agreed on? I do have Member Heron.
Yeah,
Member
I'm
Heron?
not. Yeah, thank you. It's not clear to me. It seems to me that the speaker may have derailed us because we had already found some sort of common ground that we were going to ask for exactly those reports that you propose in that resolution. Now, for some reason, we have to include in this resolution that we are agreeing to, in principle, deliberate. I mean, why don't we just, we are already deliberating on this thing, but in order to make a recommendation as to whether we're proceeding with it, we have asked for some additional information. I really don't understand the first part of that resolution. It seems like it's it doesn't really add any value if we're saying we need some more information in order to proceed.
Okay, just to clarify from my position, what I understand it to essentially be referring to is that this matter was referred to us by the House. We need to deliberate, and then whatever we find, whether it's to increase or not increase, or to go with the IEC's recommendation, we need to then write a report to the House. So it's just a technical issue, really, to say that we have resolved to essentially follow up on the referral to ourselves. That's how I understand it. So it's not preempting any decision. Member Heron?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is our third meeting on this issue, so we are deliberating on it in order to make a resolution as to whether the bill should proceed as it was left unfinished in the 6th administration, or whether we think the number of seats should change or not. So we are already deliberating. I really don't understand that first part.
Sorry, just repeat that last sentence.
Don't understand, Chair, the introduction to the ultimate resolution, which is to ask the administration for the legal advice and the financial engagements or commitments from National Treasury that other provinces got. I'm saying is we are already deliberating on this bill that was referred to us. I'm not aware of any obligation on this committee to resolve that we are proceeding with the bill until we've done our own work on this proposal, and that work has not concluded. The work was done by another committee made up of entirely different members, maybe one or two, maybe Member Syed was there, I don't know. But we're a new parliament, a new committee with leftover work from a previous term of office, and we're busy deliberating. The Speaker's request that we decide to proceed or not seems premature to me, and we've now introduced this first paragraph or first sentence, which seems to be, suggesting we're proceeding, but subject to a whole lot of other stuff. Why don't we just get the other stuff and then resolve whether to proceed or not?
Member Walters?
Chair, if we're already busy deliberating, as Member Heron suggests, then there shouldn't be a difficulty with the wording that we proceed with the process of deliberating. It might be tautology, it might be a repetition in his mind, but there certainly cannot be a principled objection to what is being proposed.
Okay, at some point we're going to have to move on. So what I'm going to say is, do we have a proposer for this resolution? Member Walters, do we have a seconder? Member Stevens? Member Heron, do you wish me to note your objection to the proposal?
Yes, please, Chair.
Certainly, we will be doing that. Thank you very much. Member Van Zyl, do I see Member Van Wyk, do I see a hand? No. Okay. So that resolution is, yes, Member.
My apologies. I do agree with the resolution as put forward. Just asking, will you now come to the point where we just attach a timeline for the administration to come back to us?
I think that's very reasonable. Let's just attach a timeline to that, which leads me to the point that we're going to talk about shortly, which is, we may as well actually just talk about it now. The issue of the Children's Commissioner is ahead of us. The current term expires in May. I am going to ask the procedural officer to just give us an update on what's happening there. But the difficulty is with the budget that was obviously postponed. A lot of April is going to be taken up with the budget. We have a number of public holidays in April, and we have to get finalization of a Children's Commissioner by May. So we are going to have to ask for extra slots. We've already received an extra slot, which we'll refer to shortly, on the 25th. It's a Tuesday. It's about 3 days or 2 days before the provincial budget. And if we can, with the permission of or the concurrence of the committee, agree to approach the Chief Whip about extra slots, possibly even during the constituency period during April, so that we can get everything done. So I want to give people a heads up on that, if that's acceptable. So let's give a date when they must come back to us. Today's let's say 14 days, because I think either the information is readily available or it is not, in which case, whether it's 14 days or 21 days, it's probably not going to become available from other provinces. So would that then be acceptable? Thanks. Okay, so that deals with that matter on the agenda. Then just on to the consideration and adoption of the draft committee meeting. Sorry, Member.
Chair, no, thank you very much. I want to agree. I think there's also, as I think we mentioned, there's a week there where there's sometime in April, like a free week. Not a free week, but I mean a constituency week. Maybe we could look at that. Then just in addition, I don't know, it's not the Children's Commissioner issue, but I wanted to put on the table, the Premier in the State of the Province address made reference to the Provincial Strategic Plan 2025-2030 that was adopted by Cabinet in the province. Now, I know the program is tight. We're looking at the Children's Commissioner, but the strategic plan speaks to much of what we are doing, whether it's a Children's Commission. I was wondering whether we could find a slot where the Premier and the department could probably come and present on the provincial strategic plan at some point. to the committee. Thank you.
That's a good suggestion. In addition to that, I've also been informed that the Premier's office is very keen to come and do a presentation on the energy resilience plan. And I think after our trip up to the Central Karoo and seeing quite a lot of solar and wind farms, I think that was something that would be of great use to us. And then also, I can't even read my own handwriting now, the report that obviously comes out of the Central Karoo on issues like the e-centres. I think that's so I think we need to deal with the Children's Commissioner as speedily as we can so we can then move on. I think at this point, before we do the minutes, if our procedural officer could just give us a quick heads up on what's happening with the Children's Commissioner process.
Okay, thank you, Chair, through you. For now, we are calling for nominations, and we advertised in the mainstream newspapers as well as our website and social media platforms. And I've also asked all members to share it on their platforms, and people are sharing it and sharing it. So the closing date for this is on Friday. So that will those nominations will be closed on Friday, and then I will draft a list of those nominations, and then that list of names should be published in the mainstream newspapers as well as all the platforms that we used before for any objections, and then we give that person we inform that person of the objection and give them opportunity and give them the reasons, and they must give them opportunity to. So the timelines is that we gave 2 weeks for publication of calling for nominations, and now we will be asking for 7 days for objections, and then the committee can decide on how long they'll take when it comes to objection process, if there are any. You know that the previous process there was 2 objections to names, so we don't know if we will receive, and then the committee will have to do the shortlisting, interviews, and then recommend the candidate. But then the committee, we will have to look for a date for the committee to sit and decide on criteria and things like that. So the committee has to sit and, like Chairperson said, in constituency period, probably. Thank you, Chair.
A sticky button here. Thanks very much. Okay, so that's then the Children's Commissioner. Can we then deal with the consideration and adoption of the draft committee meeting minutes of the 14th of February, which have been provided to you, and which I right now can't find. Here we go. Okay, so page
Chair.
1. Yes,
My apologies for taking you back.
No.
I think it's just important that we as the committee give you the mandate as the chairperson, since for reasons mentioned by yourself, and to enable us to complete the process, that we provide you with a mandate to scrutinize the parliamentary program in order for us to meet the deadline, and us as a committee can then subsequently oblige, instead of having to convene another meeting and decide on dates for you to scrutinize the parliamentary program accordingly.
Thank you for that mandate. And then we will make sure that we come back with a clear timeline as well as feedback. And then our next meeting also will be on the 25th, which we can then also deal with some of the issues of the Children's Commissioner. Obviously, then there will still be advertising, but we can deal with where we are then in the process. Yes, Member Walters.
Chair, I would like to second the proposal just for the technical part of it, and then also second the minutes that ruined our Valentine's Day.
Speak for yourself. I love spending my Valentine's Day in political meetings. Okay, so then we accept the minutes as then being correct. Okay, then. Okay, do we have any further resolutions and actions? Just to note that you will be getting the CVs of the applicants or the nominees for the Commissioner for Children. Please read them as you receive them so you don't end up with a whole pile at the same time. so that we're then prepared at the next meeting to take the next steps and move forward with that. Everybody, thank you very much. Thank you very much for working during this time. And yes, enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.